Let's take up our story again in Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 7, where we are reminded about the aggressive activities of the enemies of the Jews to the rebuilding effort. Now, when these guys that surround the Jewish homeland of Judea, when they first became aware of the wall, they mocked the rebuilding effort. But as it starts coming together, they start realizing this is serious. Pretty soon, these guys will have their capital city re-walled. They'll have a secure headquarters, and then they might cause trouble for us. So they start thinking that it might be worth their while to attack the Jewish people and stop it. So that's what we read next. Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 7. When Sanballat, he's the guy that's probably headquartered out of Shechem to the north, and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites heard that the repairing of the walls of Jerusalem was going forward and that the breaches were beginning to be closed. They were very angry, and they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. Now that would technically, I think, be a violation of Persian law, because Artaxerxes has given the Jewish people permission, even directive, to rebuild these walls. But these guys are so worried about a Jewish resurgence in their area that might overwhelm their territories, their countries, that they're willing to take the risk of getting in trouble with Artaxerxes. So it says they plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem to cause confusion in it. Now, what's the Jewish response? Well, typically Nehemiah. We prayed to our God. So Nehemiah starts praying again and encourages the people to pray. But he also is pragmatic. It says, and we set a guard as protection against them day and night. So they're aware that there's the possibility of a sneak attack. So they start having 24-hour guard that's going on. Now in Judah, it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. So they're getting tired. There's too much rubble, because this is the ruins of the city of Jerusalem, the great city. So there is a lot of junk that's left over from its destruction 150 years earlier. And they're picking through that rubble in order to find the usable stone material for the building of the walls. So there's too much rubble. By ourselves, we are not able to rebuild the wall. So some of them are starting to feel like this is too big of a job for us. We can't get this thing done. Our enemies said, they will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work. So there's that plot of attack that's also going on besides the people being tired. And then verse 12 reports, at that time the Jews who lived near them came from all directions and said to us 10 times, you must return to us. So these are the people that have not come to rebuild the walls, but they are worried that the Jewish homeland is going to be attacked any moment, and they need these wall builders to come back home to help defend their hometowns, their home territories against this possible attack by the Ammonites and the Moabites and the Shechemites and the Philistines. And so there's this pressure to stop the building project. Verse 13, this is how Nehemiah responded. So, in the lowest parts of the space behind the walls, in open places, I stationed the people by their clans with their swords, their spears, and their bows. So he organizes the defensive forces in those places behind the wall, gaps that might still be assailable. Places that are not high enough yet to really make it tough for the people to get over it. So he puts some of his 24-hour guard in places like that. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles, those are the guys that are probably wealthier and they belong to leadership families, and to the officials and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember he who is great and awesome, and will fight, and then fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. So he encourages them, remember who you are. Don't be afraid. We've got God on our side. And then you be ready to do whatever it takes to get this project done and protect God's people. Verse 15, when our enemies heard that it was known to us, that is, that they were thinking about attacking, and that God had frustrated their plan, we all returned to the wall, each to his work. So apparently there was a little bit of a lull in the building project to prepare for this presumed attack. And once the other side figured out that they were all ready, they gave up. And then Nehemiah sends the people back to work. But he keeps them on high alert. He makes them act like militia people. Verse 16, from that day on, half of my servants worked on construction, and half held the spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail. So half the people were doing construction work, and the other half were on standby as military force, and they also had the material that could then be used by the workers should they need suddenly to change over to fighting. The leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah who were building the wall. So we've got the leadership that's behind this whole thing. Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held his weapon with the other. So even those that were actively engaged in work on the building project, on the wall project, they still took their weapons with them, their personal weapon, so that they could fight at a moment's notice if that was needed. Verse 18, each of the builders had his sword strapped at his side while he built. And the man who sounded the trumpet was beside me. Trumpets back at this time were used as long-distance communication devices in war. And so here's Nehemiah's instructions. I said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, the work is great and widely spread. We're separated on the wall far from one another. Now that means as the larger group. They're doing this wall on a perimeter of about 2 miles. And so sometimes they're at least, they might be right next to the people next to them, but the people on the other side of the city, they're half a mile, 3/4 of a mile away. And so there has to be a plan for defending the city when you're spread out like that. So verse 20, he tells them, in the place where you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. So he says God's going to fight on our behalf, but also we need to do what we can. So I'm going to have a trumpeter next to me, and I'm going to be patrolling the walls. I'm going to be going around to the different places. And if I find out that we're being attacked at a certain place, I'm going to have the trumpeter sound in that area. As soon as you hear the trumpet sound, come there and help defend the wall. And so we labored at the work. Half of them held the spears from the break of dawn until the stars came out. So they worked from sunup to sundown. I also said to the people at that time, let every man and his servant pass the night within Jerusalem, that they may be a guard for us by night and may labor by day. Now, some of these guys had started the building project, walking, a few miles from their hometown, from their city that was nearby, doing the work, and then walking back home again. But now that this threat of attack is hanging over them, Nehemiah gives the order, I want everyone staying inside the walls at night. I want you to find a place to sleep here and then work each day because I don't want you going back and forth between here and your home outside the walls until we're done. Verse 23. So neither I nor my brothers, nor my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us took our clothes off. Each kept his weapon at his right hand. So Nehemiah and his guys, the guys closest to him, they don't even undress at night. They just stay in their clothes all the time, fully ready to fight. Chapter number 5. We have a crisis that pops up amongst the Jewish people at this time. Now, I already told you it's the second half of the summer of 444 BC. So there is some agricultural work going on, some harvests that are going on by those not doing the active work on the building. And some of them are in trouble financially because of circumstances that are going to be explained here. Chapter 5, verse 1. Now there arose a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers. For there were those who said, with our sons and our daughters we are many, so let us get grain that we may eat and keep alive. There were also those who said, we're mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our houses to get grain because of the famine. So because of all the stuff that's going on, there's apparently not quite enough food to really go around. And that drives the price of food up. And these guys are amongst the poorer people. And so they're talking to Nehemiah about how you've got to make sure that there's food available for us. Because right now, we're actually having to borrow money, or at least go and get our food on credit. So we're mortgaging our inherited fields and vineyards and houses in order to not starve to death right now. Verse number 4. There were those who said, we've borrowed money for the king's tax on our fields and our vineyards, and now our flesh is as the flesh of our brothers, and our children as are their children. And yet we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves, and some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but it is not in our power to help it, for other men have our fields and our vineyards. So it's the normal sort of situation that when you live in a country, you pay taxes. Now, these people live inside the Persian Empire. So they are paying taxes to the Persian Empire, to King Artaxerxes. But they are also having problems paying local taxes and local prices for necessities. And so they're having to take out loans in order to pay taxes to Persia in order to buy necessities locally. And that means that they are going to become slaves here in their home country, perhaps lose everything that they've been working for. Now remember, they've been back in the land, some of them, for a couple of generations now. And the same old thing has happened here that always happens. Over time, some of the Jewish people, particularly in this case, some of those that have the power and the wealth, start taking advantage of the poorer and less prosperous and powerful people. And so that's exactly what we see here, is there's trouble coming. And we're going to add one more thing to this. According to my calculations, a sabbatical year is just on the horizon. When the 7th month comes around, the sabbatical year will start, and that means they will have to live out of their stored up supplies for an entire year plus. because they won't be able to plant until a year from now and harvest months after that. And so the sabbatical year was always a year that you had to live off of past savings. Well, these guys don't have any savings. They are in a mess, living hand to mouth already and going into debt with that. So it's a crisis moment. Now, Nehemiah he's impacted emotionally by hearing this report. Verse number 6, I was very angry when I heard their outcry and their words. And I took counsel with myself, which means I started thinking about this issue. And I brought charges against the nobles and the officials. I said to them, you are exacting interest each from his brother. Now, it is illegal by Jewish law to loan money with the intention of getting more money back. That is illegal for a Jewish person to do that to a Jewish person. And these guys apparently were doing exactly that. They were taking advantage of the poor people. And now that Nehemiah is aware of it, he tells them what you're doing is wrong. It is against God's law. And so I held a great assembly against them. So he brings everybody together in a great big meeting. And this is all happening while the wall's being building, understand. And he said to them, we, as far as we are able, have brought back our Jewish brothers who have been sold to the nations. So we have done our best to bring as many Jewish people that are willing to do so back here to the Jewish homelands, because they had been in exile, and some of them had been living in slavery in exile. And so we've been trying to bring them home again. But now you even sell your brothers that they may be sold to us. So you're turning some of these Jewish people into the slaves of Jewish people. Now, there was, under Jewish law, the possibility the Jewish person could become the slave of a Jewish person. But it was effectively helping them out. Basically, you let them work for you for some part of 6-year period until their debt was either paid or the 7th year came by where the remaining balance of their debt was wiped out. So Jewish people having slaves that were other Jewish people was intended to help the person out, to basically give them a place where they could live and work and eat safely until they were out of debt or until the debt was forgiven. But Nehemiah is saying, you guys are just trying to take advantage of these guys. Verse number 8 continues. They were silent and could not find a word to say. So they are guilty. So what are they supposed to say? Yeah, you're right. We are doing exactly what you said. So they say nothing. Verse number 9. So I said, the thing that you are doing is not good. Ought you not to walk in the fear of our God to prevent the taunts of the nations of our enemies? So aren't you supposed to be living according to the Mosaic law so that we don't end up in trouble with God and we don't end up with people saying nasty things about how we treat each other? Verse number 10. Moreover, I and my brothers and my servants are lending them money and grain. So he says, what are you doing? I'm giving them money free of charge to help them with their trouble. And you're charging them interest. Let us abandon this exacting of interest. Return to them this very day their fields, their vineyards, their olive orchards, and their houses, and the percentage of money, grain, wine, and oil that you've been exacting from them. So Nehemiah, who is functioning as the government leader of the Jewish people at this time. Remember, that's what he's been appointed as. He tells these nobles, these leaders of the community, I want you to knock it off with the exacting of interest, and I want you to turn around and give these people their property back. I want you to forgive the debts. Now, he's probably saying this shortly before the sabbatical year is about to fall, so they're supposed to be doing that anyway in a matter of weeks or months. So it shouldn't be a problem for them to obey. Verse 12 says that they said, we will restore these and require nothing from them. We will do what you say. So they agree. Now, I don't know if they agreed only because he has the power or because they were repentant and realized that what they'd done was wrong. I hope it's the latter. So I called the priests, and I made them swear to do as they had promised. So the priests are brought in as a reinforcement to what these guys have agreed to, because the priests are basically going to be witnesses of oaths taken in the name of God by these nobles, by these leaders, that they're going to quit charging interest and they're going to return all the property and the payments. Verse number 13, I also shook out the fold of my garment. He literally does that. He grabs a hold of his own clothing and shakes it out at them as a symbolic gesture. And he said, so may God shake out every man from his house and from his labor who does not keep this promise. So may he be shaken out and emptied. Excuse me. So sometimes you would use the folds of your garment to carry things. And so what he's gesturing with, what he's demonstrating with is may God shake you out of his lap if you don't keep your promise here. May you be abandoned by God if you don't do exactly what you're promising. And so all the assembly said, Amen, which is the Jewish way of saying, I agree with that. And they praised he who is, and then the people did as they promised. And so apparently they started the sabbatical year a little bit early this year, and all these poor people had their children and themselves released from these debts and from slavery, and they even had some of their properties and possessions returned to them. And that's all great news for another restart of the Jewish people. Verse 14, moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year, that's the year of Artaxerxes, so we're talking about 444, to the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king, 12 years. So this is the first time we find out that he remains as the Jewish governor for the Persian Empire of Judea, of Jerusalem, for 12 years. So he says, during that entire time, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allowance of the governor. Now, governors are supposed to be able to tax the local people for their own support. And Nehemiah would have had that right, that authorization. But Nehemiah, who's writing this book toward the tail end of his time, he says, for the 12 years that I served as governor, I didn't do that. I lived out of my own savings, out of my own pocket, which should also tell you that he was a very high-placed person before he ever took on this job and had saved up an awful lot of wealth. So verse number 15, the former governors who were before me laid heavy burdens on the people and took from them for their daily ration 40 shekels of silver. Now, there's a little bit of confusion here I want to clear up. The daily ration is talking about what the governor needs to live each day. So it's not just simply feeding himself. He has to feed his servants, and he has to feed the people that are visiting with him and doing business and things like that. And we're going to have some sense of how much was involved in that in just a little bit. So that's the needed thing every day. But the 40 shekels of silver seems to be the tax assessment for an entire year against every working person. Now, a silver shekel later will be equivalent to 2 days' wages. So we're looking here at basically 80 days' wages as the local tax assessment by the governors so that they could live in luxury. And so Nehemiah doesn't like that. That's why he's reporting it. Even their servants lorded it over the peoples. So even the servants of the governors were being mean to the common people. But I did not do so because of the fear of God. So Nehemiah says, I didn't engage in any of that activity. I also persevered in the work of the wall, and we acquired no land, and all my servants were gathered there for the work. So I'm not here to try to line my own pockets. Moreover, there were at my table 150 men, Jews and officials, besides those who came to us from the nations that were around us. So he has a staff of 150, plus those that are coming to do business. Now, what was prepared at my expense for each day, so here's the daily ration, was 1 ox, 6 choice sheep, and birds. And then every 10 days, all kinds of wine in abundance. Not surprising that he, the former wine steward of the Persian Empire, has lots of wine that he has at his table. Yet for all of this, I did not demand the food allowance of the governor because the service was too heavy on my people. So I did not tax the people for my efforts. Remember for my good, O my God, all that I have done for this people. We'll mark our place there and come back and talk more about Nehemiah tomorrow.